Sarada Uchiha's Mystery New Power, a Kamui variant? Sarada Uchiha has finally awakened a mysterious new ability with her Mangekyo Sharingan. There's been a lot of buzz online about its resemblance to Kamui. Is this truly a space-time technique used by Obito and Kakashi, or is it something entirely unique? In Boruto, 2 Blue Vortex, Chapter 20, Sarada demonstrates a power that appears to distort space and allowed her to repel through Ryu's control. If this is indeed a Kamui variant, then what does it mean for future combat engagements? Let's analyze her abilities, explore its potential applications, and discuss how it could evolve into the most formidable techniques in the Uchiha lineage. So Chapter 20 of 2 Blue Vortex is called Because of Love, with Konohamaru on the cover there. And so I asked CHAT GPT, based on the release of Chapter 20, is Sarada's new abilities similar to Kakashi's long-distance Kamui? The response I get from CHAT GPT is that, based on Boruto 2 Blue Vortex Chapter 20, Sarada's new ability does not explicitly function like Kakashi's long-distance Kamui, at least not in the same way we saw in Naruto Shippuden. And then furthermore, CHAT GPT explains Kamui, the long-range variant, which is Kakashi's version, allows him to warp objects and attacks into the Kamui dimension from a distance, whereas the short-range variant, which is Obito's version, allows to phase through objects, teleport his body into the Kamui dimension. And to continue further, Sarada's ability in Chapter 20, based on what's shown, her Mangekyo Sharingan, produces a distortion effect, but it doesn't clearly transport objects into another dimension. The attack seems to manipulate space around her target in a unique way, possibly warping or bending it rather than a full-on teleportation. There is no clear sign yet that Sarada's ability sends things to another dimension like Kamui, but it does affect the space around her target in a way that it resembles it. So then ChatGPT asks, is it a Kamui or something new? And so given the Uchiha history, Sarada's ability may be a unique space-time jutsu similar to Kamui, but with different properties. It's possible that this is an incomplete or early stage of space warping ability, which could develop into something more refined in future chapters. The visual effect in Chapter 20 does share some similarities with Kamui warping, but until we get more explanation, it's uncertain whether it operates under the same mechanics. And so ChatGPT would further go on, more on this, on how Sarada's ability could evolve in future chapters. So since Sarada's Mangekyo Sharingan ability and the 2 Blue Vortex Chapter 20 shows space-distorting properties, but doesn't seem to function exactly like Kakashi's Kamui, we can speculate on how it might evolve in these upcoming chapters. And so, what are the next steps for Sarada's power? So one would be just understanding her Mangekyo mechanics. She needs to learn how to use her space warping. Does it teleport, phase, or disrupt matter? And then number 2, increasing precision. Right now the ability seems uncontrolled. If she can focus it, she could choose between offense, attack, which would be attacking enemies, and defense, phasing through attacks, or even repelling or deflect or redirecting attacks, as I'll later also go into. And then 3, unlocking the next stage. If she awakens an internal Mangekyo Sharingan later, EMS, her ability could reach its full potential, possibly combining both short and long-range applications. And so 1, the potential development into a true Kamui-style space-time jutsu If Sarada's ability is an early version of space warping technique, she could develop it in ways similar to Obito and Kakashi, such as the short-range phasing. She might learn to phase parts of her body through attacks similar to Obito's Kamui, making her nearly untouchable. Then we got the long-range warping. If her ability evolved, she could refine it to warp enemies or objects into another dimension or teleport them away. And then there's the personal dimension control, like Obito's Kamui dimension. Sarada might eventually access her own pocket space for teleportation or storing weapons. And so, to further explain the potential development into a true Kamui style space-time jutsu, in a narrative perspective, if she refines this power, it could position her as the ultimate counter to the Clog Rhymes, Shinju, or even Jura. Or just any of the Shinju in general, any one of them, since warping them away could neutralize the major threats. And then two, we have a unique space warping attack, which would be like a separate Kamui. Instead of it being a Kamui variant, Sarada's ability could be a unique spattle distortion technique that disrupts her enemy's attacks. So it could be a space-bending defense, where she might be able to distort space around her to redirect enemy attacks, similar to Shin Uchiha's ability with his weapons. It can be a localized time-space manipulation. She could slow down or trap opponents in a warp space, giving her a tactical edge in combat. It could also be a reality warping slashes. If her ability is channeled into attacks, she could cut through space itself and make it nearly impossible to block her strikes. And so, from a narrative perspective, her ability to manipulate space rather than sending things to another dimension could act as a perfect counter to Ryu's Iron Sand, since she could warp the sand's trajectory before it reaches her. And then the tactical uses for Sarada in the current battle. So if Sarada refines her ability in the short term, here's how it could change her current fight against Ryu and the Clog Rhymes. Of course, as seen in Chapter 20, it looks like she will successfully rescue Mitsuki and Araya if Ryu is controlling them with Iron Sand, which in Chapter 20, it looks like she was able to use her space warping ability to break control to sever the connection at the molecular level. And then with the same evolving ability, she can disrupt Ryu's attacks. If Ryu tries to use his Iron Sand to crush her, she could distort space around her to make the sand pass through harmlessly. And then overall, as explained earlier, countering Jura or Clog Rhyme reinforcements, if Jura enters the fight, Sarada's ability might let her teleport or displace his attacks. And that's more of a what-if situation. Now overall, where does Sarada's power fit? While Sarada's ability has similarities to Kamui, it hasn't shown the ability to transport objects into a separate dimension. Instead, it seems to distort space in the immediate area. So potential classifications, it could be a new Kamui-type technique. If it develops further, it could be a spatial warping ninjutsu if it stays more localized. It could be a hybrid attack and defense power if she combines it with another ability like lightning release, or in this case her Shidori. That would be really kick-ass, by all means, visually and conceptually here. Right now, Sarada's technique seems defensive or tactical, making it a great counter against enemies like Ryu, who rely on large-scale area attacks like Iron Sand. And so with Ryu, he seems to be more of a medium, long-range to long-range attack user. When it comes to close quarters, he relies too much on defense, taken kind of after Gaara. And so with Ryu, you kind of have to fight him almost the same way that Sasuke fought Gaara in the Chunin exams. In a way, you would have to really keep it close quarter. and you would have to find other angles of attack where he is open to. So really, we should be rewatching the fight between Gaara and Kid Gaara and Kid Sasuke from back in the old Naruto days. We could probably learn a lot from that fight specifically in translation to Ryu and Sarada. And so CHAT GPT asked, would you like to explore how she could use this power strategically in upcoming battles? And naturally, I would say, yes, please. So here are 4 ideas that AI presented to me. So, strategic uses of Sarada's space warping ability in future battles. So they're as followed: tactical uses against Ryu, possible offensive capabilities, defensive uses and evasion techniques, and potential evolution of power. So it's a bit of a long read, and so you may have to pause this and maybe zoom in if you want to read this. I, of course, am just going to read it to you to save your eyes. So to discuss further about the tactical uses against Ryu, countering Ryu's Iron Sand manipulation, if Sarada's ability functions like a spatial distortion, she could warp away incoming Iron Sand attacks before they reach her, disrupt Ryu's control by bending space around his attacks, making them ineffective. She can also protect her allies like Mitsuki and Araya by distorting the space around them to deflect or absorb the sand. A prevention method against Ryu's control over Mitsuki and Araya, or Araya, I mean. Sarada can target the Iron Sand to prevent further control by erasing or warping the sections binding them, which looks like she was successful at the end of Chapter 20, but it looks like she might have to still continue to do so that way they don't become puppets again. If her space warping extends to a small-scale teleportation, she could move Mitsuki and Araya away from Ryu without physical confrontation. And then the close-range combat enhancement, if she could distort space around her, then she can create a personalized Kamui phase effect, much like in an untouchable Obito. If she warps space in small bursts, she could appear instantly behind Ryu for a counterattack. She could also use this to increase her attack speed by closing the distance with other attack angles. Excuse the extra T on attack there, I forgot to edit that. And so this really goes to show that to really defeat Ryu is going to be the same way that Sasuke defeated Gaara in the Chunin exams. You're going to have to really keep it close quarter, but you're going to have to really act fast and counter. And if she has her own variant with Kamui, she'll be able to really land more precise hits. And so we go on with number 2, possible offensive capabilities, such as a warped shuriken or kunai attacks. She could combine her spatial distortion ability with shuriken jutsu, allowing her to throw kunai that disappear and reappear behind enemies. She could bend the trajectory of her shuriken mid-flight, making it nearly impossible to dodge. So this would actually force Ryu to put up a ultimate defense shield, but if he does that, he's going to be open to other angles of attack unless he just creates like an iron bubble of some kind. If you remember the fight between Gaara and Sasuke, Gaara, he did create like this sand ball around him. So I kind of totally see Ryu doing something exactly like that. This is really a big throwback of the Gaara-Sasuke fight back in the old Naruto. And so to continue on, she could create miniature void attacks. If Sarada's ability allows her to create small localized distortions, she could warp sections of the enemy's body away, like Kakashi's Kamui, possibly making Ryu lose his Iron Sand limbs. She could also use it to trap enemies in a localized warp space, making them move slower or become disoriented, in battle. Then we move on to number 3, defensive uses and evasion techniques. It can be used to dodge attacks with spatial distortion. If she refines her ability, she could instantly warp short distances, avoiding fatal attacks, bend attacks away to make her untouchable from certain angles, like a type of distorted time-space shield that could be a precursor of intangibility. And what I mean specifically by that is that she wouldn't really have to face through. She could just deflect it away by using that distorted vortex that she was able to create, or maybe like a miniature vortex of some kind or some kind of singularity. I'm sounding all scientific here, but, just entertain me here for a moment and just, try to be open-minded, because anything could literally happen in the next chapter in different variations. And so to continue on, she uses this to protect teammates. In a team battle scenario, Sarada could redirect attacks with localized space distortions. As I mentioned earlier, she can warp injured teammates, such as Yodo, away from danger for medical treatment or to reposition. It can even be like a throwback from the end of Naruto Shippuden, where Kakashi was using his long-distance Kamui to try to counter certain attacks that Kaguya was trying to do against Sasuke, Naruto, and Sakura. And then number 4, the potential evolution of this power. If Sarada further develops her Mangekyo Sharingan, then it could evolve into one of the following. It could be a more advanced Kamui-like technique. Other than a separate Kamui dimension, she could also create a mid-range phasing ability that allows her to become intangible for brief moments like Obito, which would make a better counterattacker against brute force fighters. And then the space-time teleportation. If her ability develops into full-fledged teleportation technique, she could instantly warp herself and teammates across distances, create a short-range teleportation attack similar to Flying Raijin, Flying Thunder God. And then reality distortion and a Genjutsu hybrid. What if she were to apply her power perception, where she could make enemies think that they're in a different space, which in theory could create a pseudo-Genjutsu effect with real space warping. So it's pretty far-fetched and maybe too imaginative, but it's worth exploring if it were to happen. So at this stage, Sarada's new power resembles Kamui, but it's not confirmed to be the same jutsu. It could be a completely original space-time technique with its own mechanics, making her a unique powerhouse in this Boruto universe. So to conclude this video, Sarada's newfound power marks a major turning point in Boruto 2 Blue Vortex. While it shares similarities with Kamui, it operates in a more localized and tactical way that grants her precise control over space rather than simply transporting objects to another dimension. Whether she refines it into a long-range attack like Kakashi's or develops an ability to phase through reality like Obito, one thing is certain, that this ability cements her as a rising force, a rising star in the new generation of this manga. And as she continues to grow, we could see her surpass expectations and redefine what it means to wield the Mangekyo Sharingan. And so overall, what do you think? Is this truly a Kamui-like power, or is this something greater than its predecessors? Thank you for joining me for this PowerPoint presentation of Sarada's Mangekyo Sharingan. And until next time, same Handsome King content, same Nerdy Bear commentary. Oh yeah!
The new world heavyweight champion,